All right, so this is some rather exciting stuff. It's just a going live on the old Facebook, the Sound Off Show. It's going to be a one-man show. I've actually done this in the last little while, where I brought somebody on and just to keep me company for the time being. Whether that's the camera's not even right yet for a half hour or whatnot. So, by the way, if you want to be a part of this and you want to come on the live stream and the live show, just shoot me an email. We'll do it sometime. So I'd love to say that I was a little more organized, that I could do this at a set time, but such is the wonders of the internet. I can schedule these things whenever we want and just do it, and you can see it the next day, and that's going to be okay, right? Most of you will see this on a Wednesday. It's Tuesday night where I am. All right. So who called this meeting and why? Labor Day is coming up this weekend. So podcasts, I want to talk a little bit about podcasts that have come out in the last little while, and I've just been doing boatloads of them. So me, I do voiceover. That's a mosquito. It's Winnipeg after all. Me, I do some voiceover, and then you also know me because I also do some radio work with a number of groups across the country. But I've been just doing so much in the way of podcasting over the last couple months. And working not only on the two podcasts that I have, but I've actually stepped out to do podcast work on a number of things that I probably would never do. So I believe tomorrow there will be a release of a podcast called Stand Up, Speak Up. It will be episode 55. I'm the guest host for it, and I'll supply the links. In fact, next week when I actually get a chance to listen back to the episode, through the wonders of iTunes and Apple Podcasts and all that stuff, I'll promote that a little bit more. One thing I would ask you to do right now, you're on Facebook Live. Would you please sign up for my newsletter? Because every time I send it out, I assume that everybody gets it, which is not the case because not everybody gets it. But there's some pretty useful stuff that I put out there regarding podcast news and notes and things you might be interested in. And I don't send out a ton. I'd love to be able to say I do these once a week. I do not do these things once a week, just because time sort of will cramp in on my style. And like I got one. So I'd love to put more than, a couple out a month. I'd love to do these things once a week, but I don't bother you too often. But when I do put it out, some effort's got into it, and there's definitely some useful stuff that goes in there. So let's move over here and take a look at some of the wonderful podcast updates we've got coming up in the next little while. So this week we had James Cridland, who is a radio futurologist. He came on the Sound Off podcast. There's James down there in the bottom left-hand corner. That's a picture that was taken at the Next Radio Conference. James puts together the Next Radio Conference. I believe the date is going to be September 17. We talked a little bit about that in the podcast we did. But you should really listen to this podcast because we talked about, podcast and broadcast and the future of radio, where it's all going. I'll just give away a couple of the fun scenes. He talks a little bit about Europe and how successful the European broadcasters have been at making money. That's the name of the game. Radio is a business. We talk about the radio industry. It's really a business. The radio business is making money. They're doing very well overseas. And in North America, not doing so well. And he gives reasons why. And you can listen to the podcast to get the answer to that. We talked a lot about Google being in the podcast space now, what that it's going to mean. He also hosted a session at Podcast Movement about audience building, which was a second session I got to be at, and was very excited to find out how to build audience, because I'm in podcast and how do we build audience? And we talked about that. And your website's really important. We talked about you need to have a website that people can go to if you have a podcast. It's not good enough just to send them to the show page of your podcast host. You need to have a website. You should have a home. And even in radio 10 years ago, radio came to that realization that the website was going to be sort of the center of where all the activity and the hub of where everyone was going to go. Well, it's the same for the podcast 10 years even after that notion came up. If you're a podcaster, get yourself a website. It's that simple. Please check out that episode with James Cridland. There's a number of articles. In fact, there's a piece of paper in back of me. This is one of the articles that I made mention to in the podcast. It's called How to Understand Podcast Stats. and he's put it together. And because it's one of the biggest questions that I ever get is I don't understand my stats. What does it mean? What's a download? What constitutes a download? And there's many, many different stats between Apple Podcast Analytics and your host stats and everything else. And sometimes people use PodTrack, and that can be confusing. And if you use SoundCloud, that's just a bunch of bots. Get off SoundCloud. Do not use SoundCloud under any circumstances. You can if you want. It's not secure, and don't use SoundCloud. Right. What else did I have going on here today? Right. So I've got another podcast. It's called Hot Air Podcast. And Hot Air Podcast, people are like, well, what's it about? Well, you know what it's about? It's about me. And that can be reasonably dull, but it's really a lot of audio that I have and interviews and people I want to talk to and just get together and make audio with and put out under my own name. So it's called the Hot Air Podcast. And a lot of people say, well, why is it called Hot Air? Well, because my mother said I was full of hot air. And so I've named the podcast Hot Air Podcast. I wanted to put that term to good use, and I believe that I have by doing that. Therefore, we've got 10 episodes that have now been released. The latest is featuring this fine individual. JC Lafontaine is a comedian in Montreal and Ottawa. Yeah, in that area. She actually is raised in Cornwall. Funny. She's funny. Anyway, the question I have, and by the way, every Hot Air podcast involves a question. It's one of my questions of life. The question of life for this episode is what happens when I bring a comedian onto my podcast, and you'll hear what you get when you check it out. So it's the Hot Air Podcast. Download that wherever you get fine podcasts. What else do I have? Listen, by the way, if you want to come on either of the podcasts, you're more than welcome. We can always create great audio together. Even on the website at hotairpodcast.com, just fill out the form. You can book yourself in a time. I'll be there at the other end. We will do a podcast, and away we go. We talk about what you want to talk about, but I'll probably be driving the ship because it's my podcast, right? Right. Other things. I was talking a little bit about the newsletter a second ago. So if you can, it's important to keep in touch. soundoffpodcast.com is the website. I also have hotairpodcast.com. That's if you want to check out the other podcast as well. There's a newsletter. There's newsletter on both. It's the same newsletter, though. Please sign up for that if you would. Because I love sending you stuff and staying in touch, and maybe you like to do it on Facebook. That's good too. I've got Instagram accounts for Hot Air Podcast and Sound Off Podcast, and I'm just talking on and on and on about all these crazy podcasts, and that's all we do, man. We make tons of podcasts here now. And if you're interested in one, just let me know, because it'd be good to do it. And I want to say hi to the people who've joined us live tonight. Lorna, great to see you, and as well Nick. Yeah, we'll be seeing you around the club. Nick's a teacher, by the way, so he's going to be going back to school. Well, he's probably already back at school, so it's because it's back to school season. And I believe also Lorna does some work in a school, so that both people, their summer vacation is finished and back to school. And I can't stand that, by the way. We're, in where I live, the kids are not even back at school yet. And already people on the radio are talking about, how was your summer? Let's talk about the best thing that happened to you this summer. Summer ain't over. Like, if you haven't gotten lucky yet this summer with whatever your intentions and goals were for the summer, you've still got time. It's just this incredible pressure. There's more pressure to end summer at this time of the year than there is to get Christmas shopping done by December 15th. You people on the radio, you're crazy. You people are crazy. Of course, this is also the same bunch that give you back-to-school commercials on July the 3rd. All right, I have to stop. It's crazy. Thank you very much. And by the way, somebody else who just joined 2 seconds ago is Elisa. She works at 107.7 The End in Seattle, and I'm going to have her on my podcast, and she will be coming up in the month of roughly February. She doesn't even know I booked her in, but one of the things she's going to do, she is going to be the one, and I haven't even told her, but I'm doing it live. She's going to be the one to unveil the Conclave agenda for this year. And she just turned on this Facebook Live, and I've already given her a job and told her exactly what she's going to be doing. She will be the third person, by the way, from 107.7 The End who's going to come on the Sound Off podcast. The first two being Leslie Scott, our program director, and Gregor, who does mornings in Seattle. Fantastic. Okay, that's all I got for this week. I'm going to try to do these once a week. Workflows, consistencies, putting out podcasts, keeping it all on even, and doing it once a week and being consistent. Very difficult to do, but I got the podcast coming out once a week, don't I? Now I've got 2 podcasts coming out once a week. All right, we're crazy. Have a great Labor Day weekend. Summer ain't over till September 21st, and that's all we got for now. That's it. You see, there's a cup of cappuccino up there, and it's nighttime. That'll keep you up all night.